We're here with Anthony Bradley, who was a very rare combination of theologian and economist and student of culture. It's an exceedingly rare combination. We're going to get into all those things today. But let's start, as we commonly do, with a little bit of background. Grandfather on your father's side was a Baptist preacher?
Yes, he was a Baptist preacher in South Alabama. My family is from the Bradley Plantation in Escambia County in South Alabama, and a lot of my family still lives on my dad's side down there. My grandfather was a Baptist pastor and was preaching all the time. So part of my preachiness, and my students can talk about me preaching in class. Some of my preachiness. What's that, Will? A part of my preachiness sort of comes from my grandfather's side.
So it's hereditary. You have no.
Yeah, I had no choice. It's like my family vocation. Right? Some people, harvest diamonds. We preach. And what happened is, when I became a follower of Christ, I realized that I was sort of chasing idols. Mm-hmm. And that I didn't really care about helping people, right? I wanted bling, right? That's all it was about, making money. And if I had to cut people open and sew them back to do it, I would have done that, right? Prescribed them some drugs, I would have done it. But I just wanted money. Money is fun. You can buy things.
And so you decided then the way to maximize money was to go to seminary.
Yes. It's interesting that if you think about what people are walking around doing, we spend most of our lives trying to graft ourselves into a narrative, any kind of narrative, somebody's narrative, right? That narrative could be a sports team, it could be a city, it could be a church tradition, and that desire for narrative often drives why we do what we do and what sorts of decisions we make and why we make those decisions. And what you find is that God gives us this compelling vision, this introduction into being in union with Christ, because we are entering into a narrative, and I would even argue the narrative, right? The redemptive narrative. And being in union with Christ makes you a woman or a man who is part of a story of God redeeming all things and using His people to those ends. I mean, that's an extremely compelling story. Now, what's really sad for many of our church traditions is that they don't present Christianity as you being invited into a narrative. I mean, we love narrative, right? We love movies about narrative. We love story. And the Bible comes to us primarily in the form of story. And God uses this, or arouses part of our identity by including us into narrative. Some narratives are bad, right? And some narratives are good and a blessing. And I would sort of ask the question, if I were sort of preaching on the street, what narrative do you want to be in? And why? What story do you want to be a part of?
And what have you picked up from Francis Schaeffer?
Well, I mean, from Francis Schaeffer, I'd say I primarily picked up a fantastic heart for unbelievers. And a desire to actually speak to the culture in a way that people can understand. I mean, additionally, seeking to actually use the tradition, use theology, use the Bible, use the resources of the Christian tradition to actually address and answer the questions of today. And in that sense, I call myself a bit of a retro-progressive. Right? Let's look back at what we've been given that's good, and how do we use those things to address the issues of today. I mean, what I get from Schaeffer also is a profound passion for social justice and issues. and a desire to see God's people not sit on the sidelines, right? But actually roll up their sleeves and get really dirty, maybe bloody, maybe suffer for the cause of bringing blessing to God's world.
What's your definition of social justice?
I get my definition from David Jones, which is from the book Biblical Christian Ethics. And when we talk about justice, it's essentially looking at the structures of society that treat people in the way in which they ought to be treated. And what we mean by that is being treated according to what it means to be made in the image and likeness of God. It's the imago Dei that drives, informs, and shapes one's construction and definition of justice. So as long as people, if you want to see if a society or situation is just, you examine it on the basis of whether or not a human person is being treated in a way that's consistent with their dignity as an image bearer of God.
The term social justice often has a political and economic impact, the way it's used today. And are you with that? Are you against it? How do you look at the left's use of social justice?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine in terms of that use because in a political economy, a lot of these issues are judicial. We have to make judicial decisions. Everything isn't always cut and dry. So I welcome dialogue, and this is something else you learned from Francis Schaeffer. You don't have to be a believer, a follower of Christ, to have a good idea. That truth is found in all contexts. Where I challenge the so-called left in terms of defining social justice is looking at those structures. Right? Is it really true that the structure you're proposing is consistent with dignity? Is it really true that the structure you propose is consistent with the dignity of the human person as it's related to producing freedom? Are they free to pursue what it means for them to be made in the image and likeness of God or not? This is why slavery is such an abomination, because it prevents people from being free to use all the things that God has given them to discover their own vocation as human beings in understanding what it means for them to be made in the image and likeness of God and to apply those things to the created order here and now.
Okay, and you mentioned slavery leads me to ask about your upcoming book, Liberating Black Theology. Right? From what does black theology have to be liberated?
Black theology has to be liberated from itself. Okay. And I say that because traditionally, and this is a theology that grew right up the road at Union Seminary with Brother James Cone, the primary anthropological presupposition with black liberation theology is that the human person is a victim of social oppression. That is the starting point of a person's identity. I want to switch the conversation and say, well, yes, of course, if you look at history, injustice happened, slavery happened because the devil is real, and the fall happened, so you'll always have injustice. But the core of a person's identity is that of the imago Dei. It's not their victim status. Because if it's just their victim status, and not something more ontological, the remedy is often short-sighted. And so the remedy becomes nothing more than a political theology, a socio-political theology, that doesn't actually help the person in the long run. So when your theology is nothing but politics and sociology, when you get cancer, it doesn't help you. Right? When your husband leaves you, it doesn't help you. When you get your leg cut off, it doesn't help you. If your theology of liberation is grounded in the Imago Dei, you're much more open to looking at the multiple ways in which the fall affects human life, personally, but also structurally. And so the remedy must deal with both the structural issues, but also the personal issues.